Welcome to the Sportsmen's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsmen's Voice podcast. Welcome in, friends. Thanks so much for tuning back into the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Glad to have you along for the ride for the day. We're going to get into a new episode here and welcome in my colleague, Chris Horton, the Director of Fisheries Policy for CSF. And then we're going to be joined by Mike Leonard of the American Sportfishing Association, ASA. We're talking rigs to reef. We're going to talk about whales and then get an update of some fishing policy here in the new year. This program was recorded back at NASC, as some of the last bit of sound has been. As like I told you in the beginning, we got so much great content out of there. All of it's still very relevant and wanting to share it with you all. We're going to get into it. We're going to talk fisheries. We haven't really delved into that here on this particular program, and I'm glad we get to. And this is a great conversation between Mike, Chris, and myself. So sit back, relax, tune in, and let's get into it with Mike and Chris. Thanks so much. Very good. Okay. Well, we're rolling, so let's get into it. I'm joined now, ladies and gentlemen, by Senior Director of Fisheries Policy, Chris Horton from CSF, and Mike Leonard with American Sportfishing Association, ASA. Mike, tell the folks your title over there at ASA?
I am the Vice President of Government Affairs.
Very good. A man in the know. So, with the time we have here, and it is, as the audience has heard, this is a very packed schedule and agenda, so we'll take advantage of the time we have. I wanted to bring you guys in here, give us updates, talk to the audience a bit about rigs to reef. Did I say it right?
Rigs to reef.
Okay, sometimes I turn things upside down in my head, and I want to make sure I got it right. So what that's all about, why people need to care about it, and then we can go from there and get a general update on fisheries policy going into 2024. We get an election year. Certainly there was some controversy closing out probably third quarter down the Atlantic. So let's do the rigs to reef first. You guys want to touch on that and explain to the folks what that's all about?
All right. Yeah, thanks, Fred. We got a lot of things we're working on, but one of the new initiatives that we're tackling here pretty soon is one called Rigs to Reefs. In the Gulf of Mexico, in 1947, we installed the first offshore oil and gas platform. Once we did that, we actually started altering the marine environment for the better. I mean, and not just for anglers, but for critters, for the whole marine ecosystem and productivity of the Gulf.
Let me interject,
Yep.
because general audience will think that's counterintuitive. So explain why that structure is beneficial.
Absolutely. Well, prior to that, the Gulf of Mexico, the seafloor is primarily mud and sand bottom. There wasn't a lot of hard substrate for organisms to attach to and grow on. So when you put a hard structure in a marine environment, stuff start to grow on it. And so you get microalgae, you get barnacles, which are able to harvest or harness the nutrients that are just drifting by in the water column that otherwise would have just drifted out to sea, and be able to start assimilating those nutrients into biomass locally. And then that just continues to build on the trophic scale up to crustaceans and corals, and then fish, small fish, and then bigger fish, all the way up to dominant predators that we like to chase as anglers, red snappers, sharks, amberjack, a number of species. So over time, since 1947, we've had as many as 7,000 oil and gas platforms, and just tremendous amount of habitat. And if you've ever fished offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, you've probably fished on an oil and gas platform, because they're fish from bottom to top, and you never know what you're going to catch. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of those being removed at a pretty high rate. Once a rig is finished producing, it has to be what's called decommissioned. So by law, it has to be removed and the substrate returned to what it was before it was even constructed. So we lose that habitat, essentially. But in 1984, there was an act passed that basically provided a pathway for platform owners to be able to donate those structures to a state's Rigs to Reef program. As you can imagine, permitting requirements and process is pretty cumbersome to do that for a state to assume the responsibility of that platform. And it takes anywhere from 2 to 4 years to do it. So not a big deal. All four of the Gulf states that have oil producing structures off the shore all have approved reef fish programs. So they've got the infrastructure or the network in place to be able to accept those. The problem is just timing because they all have one coordinator, one or two people at max working on these transitions. And again, that's fine if you just have a dozen coming out a year across the Gulf. But what we're seeing right now, there's actually over 300 that are in the decommissioning process.
Wow.
So we're going to lose a big majority of those. Of those 300, only 73 have been committed to Rigs to Reef.
So when you say decommission, that is total removal of the structure.
Yes.
Top to bottom. It's gone from the water.
Yep, that's correct. And the thing is, whether they take it to shore and scrap it, or they leave it out there for Rigs to Reef and the state's Rigs to Reef program, the well associated with it has to be capped, plugged, and safely abandoned, just like in either case. So there's no concern about hydrocarbon loss or leakage. So it's perfectly safe to leave these things out there.
But does the whole above water structure have to, I mean, obviously you don't want it to be completely submerged. Otherwise people don't know where it is unless you're marking it, right? So what does that look like?
No, it does about it is required to be, most of them have to be 80 feet below.
Is that right? Yeah. So how are we marking them out there?
GPS.
Yep.
Yeah, they're pretty accurate nowadays.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So it has to be 80 feet for navigation purposes and concerns about, ship traffic striking.
Right, exactly right.
But there has been some deviations of 60, 65 feet under the surface in areas that are with a lot less shipping traffic, but that's kind of a case-by-case basis. Negotiation with the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, the U.S. Coast Guard, and
so from the American Sportfishing Association standpoint, I mean, obviously with this created habitat and the opportunity for anglers to go out there that's been created over these last many decades, the obvious concern is fish are going to be gone if you remove that habitat.
Yeah, I mean, it's as is often the case with fisheries, it's a complicated topic. I think in general, there are some, just sort of anti-oil and gas at all costs interests at play here. But in general, a lot of it just comes down to liability. And, these structures have ended their useful oil-producing life. The oil companies aren't necessarily eager to get them out of the water if there's a possibility to leave them out there as reefing platforms. But at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to dollars and cents and liability and the urgency to get them out if they're not going to have that other structure. So a lot of it is just sort of connecting those dots of getting these Rigs to Reefs programs connected with companies, getting all the liability figured out, the costs associated with it, getting the structures redesigned to where they meet all the safety requirements. But that all has to happen pretty quickly and very well coordinated, because if it doesn't, the companies are going to say, all right, well, decommissioning deadlines are coming up. We're going to get them out of the water soon.
Wow.
So there is definitely a heavy level of regulatory, state, agency, nonprofit coordination, resources that has to come to bear pretty quickly. And that's where things can get complicated and where you can start to see expedited timelines to get these things out of the water if all those dots aren't connected at a quick enough time.
It's not just a negative for the angling community to not have these things out there, to not support the fisheries, and then, like you said, Chris, the new habitat. There's a whole economic system built up around these things. Like I think it would be devastating to have these things removed, and all these Gulf Coast communities that depend on the hobby of angling and that access, that would just be devastating.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen videos of, a lot of times it's explosives that are used as part of the decommissioning, and the amount of marine biomass that you see come floating to the surface. I mean, it's tragic to see, because these are, meccas. They're as productive of ecosystems as you'll find anywhere in the world. And, we spend a lot of time haggling over, red snapper quotas and regulations and the amberjack and all these species that, a good size of that overall biomass is associated with these structures, and you take those out of the water, and that's lost abundance, that's lost fishing opportunities, and it's often just sort of a forgotten about part of the equation, but this is a huge part of what drives fishing opportunity and fishing access in the region.
So as you're speaking, these thoughts are coming into my head that now I'm curious about the people that I don't want to call them environmentalists and such, but for lack of a better term for me to come up with at this point in the summit, that's what I'm going to call them. It seems counterintuitive because on one hand, it seems like that group of people says, get them out of here. It's not natural, it's oil and gas and the whole things. But then when they do remove them, they remove the things they're advocating for, right?
Right.
And is it an internal struggle that they just get over? And how does that work out? How they reconcile that?
I don't have an answer to that. I mean, it is a paradox.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, and this is kind of getting a little bit of a side road, but getting back to the fisheries management part of this, there's often a bit of an academic debate over, are these actual fish producers or are they just aggregators?
Mm-hmm.
And you have a hard time convincing me. I have a fishery science background. I've forgotten most of that stuff, but just anecdotally, looking at these structures, and as Chris said, you're taking habitat that was previously muddy, sandy, flat bottom, putting structure that congregates the entire food chain together. You would have a hard time convincing me that there's not increased overall abundance as a result of that. So for then folks to say, yeah, but all this is doing is just helping you all catch fish faster and depleting stocks, and the net negative impact of these structures of anything to do with oil and gas is worse. But again, these things have already, extended their entire oil-producing lifespan. If we're worried about bigger picture, carbon emissions and that type of thing, that debate's already passed because these structures aren't contributing to that anymore. So anyway, it is sort of a paradox of how you sort of reconcile. We care about fisheries, but yet we're okay with destroying these structures that are so vital to our fisheries.
So this leads me to the next rabbit hole to fall down. So Tom Opry-David is part of his new film there, and there's the big theme of it is the removal of people in the Highlands of Scotland. I'm not doing it justice, but there's a rewilding effort, right? Returning this to some form of what it used to be. I'm not sure if I'm appropriately connecting the dots here, but it seems like there may be a sect of people that want to see these things gone, will argue that they never existed before, and there's a rewilding effort of the Gulf back to muck and mire, even if they're not calling it that. Is that appropriate? Like, this is how it was in the beginning, and this is how it should be. Not sustaining life, maybe at the micro level in the dirt, but I mean, what?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because this wouldn't actually be rewilding. It would just be turning it to the condition it was before gas exploration began, which is poor habitat, less biomass, less abundance out there. Because literally the amount of natural reef in the Gulf of Mexico is very limited. And we've been able to augment that with artificial structures. But question, and this is perpetual with any species management, we're managing just some sort of standard, historic standard, or idea of what a historic standard was. But things changed. I mean, things are constantly changing. We have climate change going on. There was a study in 2004 looking at coral assemblages on platforms in the northern Gulf of Mexico. They found 11 different species. 9 of those are commonly found in the Caribbean, where you think corals are. When you think about corals, you think about Keys and Bahamas and Caribbean. We have them on these platforms too. And of those 9, 2 of them are on the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is the kind of the global watch list. And 2 of them are actually on the critically endangered list, where their populations are declining elsewhere, and they're thriving there in the Gulf. So we got changing climate, changing conditions. We have a couple of species that are critically endangered elsewhere that are doing well here. Yet we're going to take them out for the sake of going back to the way it was before these structures were installed.
Yeah, I don't mean this as an insult, but I think you're overthinking it, Fred.
I do that. I know. I do that a lot.
I think it's a more overly simplistic. Again, what I was saying before of there's deadlines that companies have to get these things out of the water unless there's an alternative reefing program in place. So that's part of it. I think the struggle and opposition comes from groups that are just less inclined to help, that are going to sort of sit on the sidelines and say, yeah, we're not going to support those efforts. We're going to sort of we're okay with letting these go by because of just fundamental anything that has anything to do with oil and gas development, we're going to be against. So the rewilding thing's an interesting theory. I think it's not quite as nuanced as that. I think it's just really simplistic. We don't like oil and gas, no matter what. This is kind of, sort of putting a good light on oil and gas. Therefore, we're not going to help.
The whole idea is crazy. Even in the movie that Tom shot, it didn't make any sense to me because it ruined everything that already existed. So I'm like, well, if they can do it there on the land, I'm sure someone's messed up in the head enough to think they can do it in the ocean. So, and me not being into it as much as you guys, I just overthink things, but that's fine. It seems like an easy sell. So what's the speed bump here? Why can't we just? This makes sense. Like the species are flourishing that are on decline. Like there's just so much positive here. Nothing is negative or affecting the environment around. We've created the industry's created something beautiful. Like just what's the holdup?
Well, from a regulatory perspective, you have two regulatory agencies that deal with offshore oil and gas and Department of Interior. Then you have the National Marine Fisheries Service that does the fishery stuff and habitat and coral programs, and they just don't seem to work very well with one another, for one. And so the process of converting these offshore oil and gas platforms requires going through all these agencies that basically have to touch at some part on the permitting process. So you've got I believe it's five federal agencies that are involved with permitting, and it's a bureaucratic burden.
Yeah, it just sounds unnecessarily. Talk about overthinking things.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into it. So the answer is I think it's going to have to be some legislation be working on with a few members of Congress that will try to make this easier. Tie it to science. We want it to be science,
of course,
and hopefully incentivize some of these companies to not try to rush to get them out. Give them a little bit of time. There's some good science that says that yes, these are important habitats here. Let's all work together. Federal agencies, state agencies, the angling community, the platform owners. These are valuable. Let's figure out how we can keep them out there. And so we're going to be pursuing that in the next Congress.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is the current structure, and I mean that the regulatory structure doesn't prioritize the value of these as artificial reefs to the extent that it needs to. It is, this is a liability, it's a burden. Unless we can come up with a good reason and an expedited way to do it, let's get them out of the water. That fisheries are not the top of mind of the folks that are currently in charge of these, and so that's, I think, where legislation that can help streamline that, make it a smoother process, can help, maybe tilt the scales to where reefing becomes a much more viable, expeditious way to ultimately continue these platforms' value in the water.
So, and I'm having a hard time with this. So they'll go sink boats and ships to create habitat, and that's okay. They'll cap these oil wells, assuming they're inspected and red tape, everyone gets their hand in that cookie jar and blesses it and says, yeah, we're good to go, remove them. So if you get to that point, at the well's cap, nothing's going to leach out of it until you're removing the structure. Things aren't adding up to me. Is it just because it's a big, ugly structure? I mean, it's underwater. You just told me it's 80 feet under, there's 80 feet of water above to not interfere with ship traffic. And like I just said, they'll purposely go out and sink barges to create habitat. So I don't know, the habitat's already there. There's nothing to create.
Yeah, I think Mike hit on it earlier. It's really an ideological, philosophical difference between folks out there that, again, it goes back to it's oil and gas, it's bad, we got to get it out. And that's kind of how.
It's just that dialed in, that horse blinders.
Chris, liability is a part of it too, right?
Liability is huge for the producers, oil and gas producers. I mean, they don't want the liability if they stop producing, they're no longer profitable. I mean, they're still liable for if the hurricane were to come through and knock one over and pieces of it wash up on the beach or what.
Okay.
All that. So they want to get those off their books when they can,
whether it's out of the water or on someone else's books.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's a cause for concern, right? I mean, you can see someone's kind of thought on that.
Yeah, and that's why you need a process to make that as smooth and expeditious to make that transfer as possible. Yep. And that's where legislation that Chris has been spending a lot of time on that hopefully we'll see in the near future can help streamline that. And
the context is important, and it's understand for the general public to hear this, to make it important to activate their legislator. Because Chris, you will go advocate and you will educate people and work with them to pass good legislation, but it's the constituency that needs to motivate them to do the right thing here. So if they, we're peeling an onion, a very big onion, just a couple layers, but just enough context here to get it a little bit and make it important to them. I think the people that are in business down there that are affected by it in the wallet get it. But the people probably inland 20, 30 miles, they may not.
Well, and the other thing is these are located in what we're talking about are those rigs in federal waters, essentially. Mm-hmm. Those fish, those waters belong to all of us in the country. I mean, if you love to fish,
it's a great point.
I mean, whether you live in Maine or Alaska, or want to go try something different from halibut that'll pull just as hard, you go to the Gulf of Mexico and run offshore and fish an oil and gas platform, or you're going to catch something big. I mean, there's such phenomenal fisheries but it's important to help people understand this isn't just a regional issue. This isn't just a Gulf of Mexico issue. This is an incredible resource that belongs to us.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I appreciate you breaking that down to a very simple podcast host. Thank you for that. Yeah. In our remaining minutes here, if you would give us an update going into the new year, some of the big pieces of legislation that are out there, things we're trying to get over the finish line that are good, things we're trying to stop from getting over the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest of the big issues, which we just talked about here at this NASC summit, is whales. So big mammal, big issue. We're here on the coast of Delaware. I don't know if this room.
No, we got a good look at the parking lot.
No, opposite direction.
Trust me, it looks beautiful.
One angle of this hotel faces the Atlantic Ocean. And we, ASA, CSF, and many other groups have been banging our heads against the wall for over a year and a half now, dealing with this regulation on right whale, the North Atlantic right whale, and a draft rule that the National Marine Fisheries Service put out last summer that would create a massive slow speed, which is essentially a de facto closure for all vessels above 35 feet to get offshore for about half of the year, all to address the extremely, extremely rare occurrence of vessel strikes in that size class with right whales. And we acknowledge that right whales are critically endangered. There's only about 340 of them left. As rare as these strikes are, there's been 5 since 2008. It is something that we as a community have a responsibility to help address this, but the National Marine Fisheries Service default is let's just regulate our way, hopefully, out of this. But the rule they came out with is so unworkable. It's based on extremely poor science. There was no collaboration, consultation with our community going into it. We had no idea this was coming. And it's really, really bad policy that ultimately isn't going to have any sort of negligible or any sort of a detectable benefit to right whales. So we've got a lot of efforts going on in Congress. There's a bill called the Protecting Whales, the Economy, and Public Safety Act, some combination of those three things. That Sportsmen's Caucus leadership in the Senate, and then there's a bipartisan House bill as well that would prevent the National Marine Fisheries Service from making any changes to existing speed restrictions until we find technology. And really, that technology is not that far out. We're, I think, a couple years out from being able to identify in near real time the location of these whales, and then with all the technology, modern technology, marine electronics, to be able to transmit that information to boaters, on your fish finder, your chart plotter, to where you'll know where these whales are. There can likely still be some regulatory component to that, but at a much smaller scale than the entire Atlantic Ocean, essentially, for half of the year. But we're going to need Congress's help in this, because to date, NOAA Fisheries has not shown any interest in engaging, working with us to have a smarter rule, which is tragic, because again, what they put out is not going to benefit the whales at all. It's just going to cripple the economy and have a devastating impact on not just recreational fishing, boating, charter fleet, marinas all up and down the coast, but if you think of the ports and all the supplies that come in to where you need vessels to be able to go faster than this, just a massive, massive impact to our economy that we need smarter approaches, and Congress is going to have a role, hopefully, in right-sizing that issue.
Yeah, just to add to that, to be clear, we as the recreational fishing and boating community absolutely want to do our part, whatever that might be, to protect whales.
Of course.
Protect. I mean, what better way to end a day of offshore fishing than to come in and see a North Atlantic right whale on your way in? I mean, how cool would that be? We would want to protect the whales. But as Mike said, what's being proposed now is extremely punitive for virtually no return on the conservation value of what they're doing. Let's figure out how to really figure out where these whales are, and then let's implement some sort of speed slowdowns around those areas where we know that they are real.
They migrators?
Yeah, they spend. I mean, it's from Canada. Their calving grounds are in the South Atlantic. Okay. So, and I think that's part of what Noah's trying to get at is sort of ranges in which there's predicted whale behavior. I mean, that's artificial intelligence has a ton of potential here to help. But I mean, yeah, what we're saying here is there's only 340 of these left. Rather than just sort of making general assumptions of, well, we think in the past whales might have come through this area.
It's a big ocean, man.
Yeah. And therefore, let's close this down. There might not be a whale within 100 miles, but yet, we're going to put these speed zones in.
What's the idea behind the speeds? And I'm only asking from my experience of being out on the Atlantic and seeing many whales, from minkies to humpbacks and, dolphins and everything in between. And my point is, unless you're up in the captain's chair, you don't really see these animals until you're pretty close. Like, they don't stand out in a crowd. They blend right in. So I guess as a outsider looking in on something like this, okay, we're going to reduce the speed so we can have a reaction time to avoid hitting these whales. But if you can't see the whale in the first place, aren't you still going to hit it just a slower amount?
Yeah, the slower speed, though, is less harmful to the whale, so that's part of it.
Like a propeller hitting it, it's still going to suck.
As somebody that fishes out of center consoles quite a bit, if you go 10 knots in a center console fishing boat, which is made to get up on plane, all you're doing is plowing water, and your bow is
you can't see anything. Yeah.
That gets back to Noah just not understanding the nature of smaller vessels and how they operate. I mean, there's huge human safety concerns with this too. I mean, to Chris's point of not being able to get up on a plane, especially in rough seas, if storms coming in, you're forced to make that judgment call of, am I going to try and protect the safety of me and my passengers on my boat, or do I worry about getting issued a speeding ticket because I'm in one of these whale protection zones right now? It's just, it's totally baffling. And again, it's just counterintuitive because, as Chris's point, it's not really going to do much to help the whale.
Yeah.
It's just going to make essentially recreational boating and fishing off the Atlantic coast next to impossible.
It's a knee-jerk reaction like many other things. It just doesn't, it's making somebody feel good in another constituency because we did something.
Just to be clear, the proposed rule is going to allow us that deviation when wind speeds exceed 39 knots. So you're 30 miles offshore and the storm's coming, and those winds start to get up to 39 knots. You're already screwed, because at that point the seas are going to be 5, 6 or higher, and it's just creates a really dangerous.
I would say, we spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill talking to members of Congress about this. I don't know that I've talked with any that fully just defend this rule. I mean, everyone, once you start talking through this with them, they recognize like, oh yeah, this doesn't sound like the right way to go.
We figured out in 26 minutes.
Yeah. And then we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, we talked about this for 26 minutes. So
yeah, we can keep going on and on about how bad this rule is. So, something needs to be changed here. And really it's a matter of how do we get from where we are now to hopefully in the next couple of years, maybe sooner, of having that technology in place to mitigate the need for this type of overreaction, overregulation, and actually do something to help conserve these whales. Because to Chris's point, we had this intrinsic, value of the marine environment, whether we're fishing for these critters or not. It's a part of the experience. We want to make sure the entire marine ecosystem's healthy. Not to mention, hitting a whale's not good for the boat either.
It doesn't seem optimal for the human beings on board.
It's just catastrophic for everybody involved. So it's a bad situation all the way around. So we recognize we want to ensure there's as little chance of that is happening as possible, but these massive speed restrictions, that's not the way to go.
So, but it's okay to hit a humpback or a minkie just because there's enough of them. I
thought you were getting ready to get into offshore wind. Which
no. That's another show. Wow, man, it's there's just so much to cover and think about and overthink about. So, and
Yeah. But I will say we've got other, plenty of other legislation
Yeah.
going on. There's a bill that several of us have been working on a happier note called the Youth Coastal Fishing Program Act, which would create a grant program within NOAA to fund programs that take kids, especially from underserved communities, fishing. Essentially catching NOAA fisheries up with all the other federal land management agencies that do, kids in the parks programs and activities, urban programs to connect people with the outdoors. NOAA Fisheries doesn't really have anything like that. So
was this a build off of ASA's Take Me Fishing? That you guys
very
have?
much compatible with that. And so we work with the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation that runs those programs. They've got, state agencies are doing a ton of this work already. Kids, fishing clubs, Boy Scouts. Yeah, there's a lot of great work going on. This is essentially getting the federal agency, the National Fisheries Service, in that game too.
Awesome.
It's a very regulatory heavy agency, as we've talked about here. They don't often focus on the why we're managing these resources and ensuring that they're healthy and happy so that people can actually access and enjoy them, especially future generations can learn about these experiences and opportunities. So that's usually a happy note that I try and complement the right wheel.
Yeah, no, we'll take it. Take the wins where you can, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Parting thoughts, Chris?
No, there's a lot of things. As Mike mentioned, the youth fishing bill. We've got a Map Waters Act for folks that don't know what that is. We passed the Map Lands Act not too long ago, which basically requires better federal data, digitized data mapped of where we can hunt, where we can access, and what the regulations are. We wanted to see the same thing on the water side, so we're working on that so that hopefully we can get to a day where your marine electronics or an app on your phone could not only tell you what you can or can't fish for, but maybe even promote, hey, do you know you can fish for mangrove snapper here?
Yeah.
There's a bunch here. Or this is a really good place to bass fish. But we want digitized data so that we know where we are and what we can and can't do on waters, because it's kind of confusing now. It's across multiple.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a number of things that'll be coming down the pipe. The American Conservation Enhancement Act will be coming up for reauthorization. Why that's important from the fishery side, because that has the National Fish Habitat Conservation through Partnerships Act. I think that's
We went through a few iterations. Yeah, that sounds right.
It's a NIFAT. So that's a grassroots grant program through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, kind of a grassroots. There's 20 partnerships, fish habitat partnerships out there, span coast to coast, that really look at solving some local issues, habitat issues, and improving ultimately recreational fishing. And it needs to be reauthorized. And
lead fishing tackles in there too.
Always.
But there's some other, Chesapeake Bay programs, some good conservation programs that are hopefully going to be part of that reauthorization as well. We've got this great America's Great Outdoors Act. I mean, it's amazing working in the fishing community, how many different issues you get to put your hands on, because there's not like this one centralized, this is the law that governs fisheries regulations and everything to do with it. It is state by state, region by region, species by species, sometimes dealing with the tackle that you can use or the way you can operate your boat, your ability to get out on the water. There's a lot to it. So keeps me and Chris pretty busy.
Absolutely. Can't forget about the Farm Bill.
Yeah, right. I was going to make sure we got that in there.
Yeah, the Farm Bill is going to be it's a hugely important bill for conservation in this country. And unfortunately, I don't think enough anglers really recognize the value it has for fish and water quality.
No.
Because pretty much every conservation program touches on water quality or preventing soil erosion. So, basically our water quality begins wherever the rain falls. A lot of that's going to fall on private lands. And if we can work with farmers to make sure that they're managing their lands well, and that runoff is as clean as it can be, then it starts out clean, and we're in good shape. So the Farm Bill is incredibly.
And we're going to bring you back, Chris, for another episode just focused on the fishery side of the Farm Bill, so the audience can look forward to that in the very, very near future. That's it, guys.
Oh, we can keep going.
I'm sure we could, but we're up against it, and like I said, there's a full agenda, and I got to return you guys to your fans down there who I had to pull you away from. So thank you so much for offering your time and your thoughts and educating our audience and myself a little bit more. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Appreciate this opportunity. I'm glad y'all are doing this. Help get the word out. I think a podcast is a great forum to dive into these, because it's hard on a lot of these policy issues to just, do a short press release or a short press statement. I mean, these are really complicated issues. So podcast is a good platform to allow for this sort of deeper dive. So I'm glad y'all are doing this.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you joining us. Thanks, Fred. I feel so inadequate sitting here with my country accent from Arkansas. You guys sound like, literally, I feel like I'm on a radio talk show somewhere. Y'all got great radio.
You've got authenticity, Chris.
That's true, yeah. Hopefully folks can understand what
Thanks, guys. Well, if you couldn't tell, and I do my best with some of these long recording sessions, they get tired of talking. I don't think it detracted from the conversation. You're certainly getting, if you do these kind of things, you know what I'm talking about. If you're in radio or you're doing voiceovers or, whatever it is, you do a podcast, if you're talking for more than a couple hours, few hours, it gets a little tiring. So you maybe get a little punchy, but I think that particular conversation went just fine. Certainly adds some levity to the conversation. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. And as always, I enjoy learning. Having been removed from this conversation, be able to think about it for a number of weeks now, I still come to the same conclusion that, especially where it comes to rigs to reef, that it is, as Mike said, it's a paradox. It is this crazy place that some of these people have come to, that they're so vehemently against A, that they're willing to destroy B, something they advocate and love so much, just because they're so tied into this mindset. I really still remain at a loss. Again, all these weeks later, I don't see how you have these beautiful ecosystems that are created. I mean, if anything, it's like this silver lining or something beautiful comes out of something that the ominous they, deem a negative, or something that's so tragic, by way of setting up oil rigs and pulling that stuff that's made naturally in the earth out for the benefit of human beings. Regardless, that's, again, a show for another time. The stuff's there. And over time, it's created such beauty in a place where there wasn't, as you heard Chris and Mike talk about. Like, before these structures were in place, nothing existed except for the muck and any subterranean creatures living in there. But as far as marine life, really didn't have any value. And now, I mean, holy smokes, nature figures it out and creates these amazing ecosystems. Fishing, scuba diving, snorkeling. I don't know if you're snorkeling all the way out there, but certainly, diving on those structures and just, being able to photograph that, if that's what you do. I mean, these are incredible spaces that have been created out of some man-made structure. And again, I'm still coming to that point I was making about, decommissioned ships, barges, shipwrecks, what have you. And some of this is purposely done to create reefs, to create habitat. And here, it's just a byproduct of something that I assume these people certainly didn't think it was going to be a byproduct of extracting oil from within the earth and the ocean. But here we are. And, whatever. I'm beating a dead horse, but it still perplexes me to this day. And I think it'll continue to. We'll keep you posted on this. Hopefully, even though it's an election year, this kind of policy can gain traction and there'll be some sort of movement. And Chris and Mike and our partners will bring you updates on how they're faring on that. Again, it seems like a no-brainer here to not destroy these critical ecosystems that are critical now at this point. They're established, and so many species are dependent upon it. And we'll keep you updated. Touched on the right whale issue up and down the Atlantic coast. Again, another head scratcher there, and one that, as alluded to in the conversation, I think we all want what's best for the whales. I think they're impressive, majestic creatures of the ocean, and I think every human being is in awe by them, and we do not want to see certainly any harm by way of vessel strikes come to them. But these things are the color of the ocean. I mean, it's reduce the speed all you want, and then given certain circumstances, here comes this human life versus the other life. I don't know. I'm gonna take a chance and probably get a speeding ticket if a certain situation presents itself, and save myself and my family if I'm ever put in that. Again, no one wants to hurt the whales or be involved in such a predicament, because there's no good for anyone in that. But alas, another one of those situations. Will keep you posted on, see how that all turns out. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed the little policy update. Things are not all bad. I mean, obviously you heard Mike talk about some initiatives coming forward with getting, kids and some recreational fishing done. So there's a lot of positive. I try not to be doom and gloom, and I always have this little black cloud following me on this program. It's not all bad. There is some really good stuff going on, and there's, Mike shared some of that with. So again, as we get through this first part of the year in this legislative session, and everything being election year, where we do have those wins, we do have those silver linings or shining stars, we'll be sure to bring them to you here and updating the stories we have covered. Make sure you're checking us out on the interwebs. Make sure you're visiting us socially. Check out our partners. ASA does a great job on Instagram and Facebook, and they have a whole lot of resources there. And they're doing good work over there. And we're very, obviously very happy and proud to have them as partners in the fight for what we all enjoy. Housekeeping. I gave you the social plugs. I do want to hip y'all, grab my notes here. I think we've already alluded to the fact that our next NAS summit at the end of this year is going to be in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is pretty cool. Yours truly, I've never been to Louisiana. There's only a handful of states I've never been to, so this will be pretty awesome for me personally to get down there and experience the beauty that is Sportsman's Paradise in Louisiana. Looking forward to that. I'm trying to get you to the dates here. We're going to go before the holiday season. So November 19th to the 22nd, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And if you were with us in Delaware, you know how great of a time that was. Come on back, hang out with us. It's going to be a great bunch of days down there in Louisiana right before the holidays. If you're hearing this and you're so intrigued, join us. Go on to the CSF website, check out the page about NASC. Ask legislators. If you knew people that went down to Delaware, if you knew some agency personnel that went down there, if you knew some industry people that went down there, ask them. You can call us and ask us, and we'll turn you on to some folks that can give you a firsthand account. But this is a really unique opportunity to really hear lots of perspectives and different points of view from different professionals and academia as well, throughout our space, all huddled up and hanging out in one spot for a handful of days. And the conversations are just awesome. It's just nothing but learning and great opportunity for networking and collaborating. It's all very positive. And we have some great outdoor activities that we do at these events, and certainly Louisiana will provide for great opportunities as this program learns about what those opportunities are going to be, and the planning process will bring that to you. So if you are coming, you can get on an early sign up and not miss out on the opportunities there, because many of them are limited space, so it's first come, first serve. So anyway, NASC is coming. Again, those dates, February 19th to the 22nd, 2024. Go down there, have some fun, get back, eat some turkey. Yeah, most of the states, it's after the rut, and so no worries there for the deer hunters. And then get back home and shoot some ducks and whatever else you got going on. So there's your NASC update. That's gonna do it for this show. Thanks so much for bringing us along. Coming up next on the podcast, guys, I'm gonna introduce you guys to Isabella Mucci. She heads up our collegiate program, where we have basically little organizations within the college system for young folks that are looking to get into policy, looking to get into the sporting community space, for whatever that looks like. So Isabel and her program provides for that. So we're going to have her come on with a couple of student leaders that she has in her system, UMISS and Clemson, if I remember right. So we're going to bring that program to you here next. And if you've got young people in your life, college students, I think this is up their alley. You're going to want to tune in for the next podcast. You want to tune in for all of them, obviously, but especially this one if you want to get some good information here. Pass along to the undergrad in your life or beyond if they're so inclined, and get involved there, and we can put you in touch with Isabella. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsmen's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.